You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
I'm Fergal O'Keefe, and you are very welcome to a special bonus episode on the US election with Daniel Gilmore, a Republican from North Carolina, and Sean O'Neill, a Boston Democrat now living in Ireland, to give a topical, informative and entertaining insight into the current state of America. And after this discussion, I now realise that this election is going to be much closer than we generally hear in Irish media. Every election has an everyman character. I think if you remember the last election, there was Joe the plumber. I have you two guys on here to represent everyman in America. So I'm calling you Dan the Republican and Sean the Democrat.
That's appropriate.
That's correct. Well, and Fergal, to be quite honest, what your audience is going to hear for the next 35, 40 minutes, 45 minutes is decades old. Sean and I have had debates on politics for a long time. The difference, today is the fact that Trump has taken us to a polarized space where when Sean and I would enjoy having a conversation, sometimes lengthy, sometimes heated, over a pint of Guinness. But at the end of the last pint, we'd go arm in arm, back to his house and everything was forgiven.
Yeah.
Today's climate is, it has to be either or. Families are literally disowning, children disowning parents. People aren't talking to neighbors and friends. Debates end up in fistfights, sometimes death. It's just an environment that's crazy to me. So it's unfortunate, but it's the reality of where we're at.
But I also think, because Dan, you and I go way back, and I think that, America has always been a country of extremes. Number one, America strives for number one, being the best at this, and which is a wonderful cultural trait. But sometimes it's not realistic when it comes to politics, because I think it can't be all or nothing. And I think that's what Dan is referencing, that this all or nothing kind of logic is really, it's just acidic, it's dangerous, it's causing, as Dan was saying, it's causing rifts in families, it's civil unrest. It's something I've never seen in my lifetime. And America was always about, we come together no matter what. They have this unification of a massive country of 330 million people, and they all are American. And now that's not the case. They're either blue state or red state. They're either Trump or not. And it's a very dangerous situation.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I wanted to do the podcast is because I've done a number of interviews, and nearly every person talked about their travels in America and talked about how much they loved America, but also every one of them pretty much said that they didn't want to go there at the moment because of what's been going on over the last 4 years. So that's why I wanted to talk about this, is our perception here in Ireland or in Europe right about America? Is America welcoming for people? I did my J1 in 1992. I went to Wildwood, New Jersey, had an amazing time. And it gave me a real love for America because, I got a job there. I started prepping in a restaurant. By the end of the summer, the head chef had a heart attack, and I ended up being the head prep chef and brought to Florida with the family afterwards. So welcoming, and it gave me a real love of the country. But I have to say, I've been reluctant to go there. And that's kind of me putting out my stall that at the moment, I don't really want to go to America. So that's why I'm interested about what's going on there at the moment. But what's the mood there like now?
Oh yeah, it can't be any more hostile. Again, and the president, and I have to say, I haven't changed my Republican stance. And Sean and I can debate that later if it's needed. But the platform of which Donald Trump runs on still falls within my political realm. He doesn't, and the fact that even the debate the other night, which to me was like a grumpier old men movie, to just bickering and trying to put down your candidate instead of actually validating yourself as a candidate. The fact that he speaks in hyperbole all the time, everything's the best this, the beautiful that, and the whatever. It's just, I literally can't watch it. So I'm not going to vote for Biden, I will say that, but Trump will not get my vote. And that's the second time. And it just amazes me, as Sean said, 130 million people in our country. And these are the two finalists, and it's got to be either or. It's really disheartening. And the people that follow Trump are going to go to the grave for him. I mean, it's just the way that it is. And I don't understand it, but I'll say the same thing. And Sean and I debated this over the 8 years of Barack Obama, where Sean was a big Barack, Obama fan, and I was not. I'm not big on entitlements. I'm not big on paying a lot of taxes, which is what happened to me. If there was a Republican in the 8 years that Obama was there, I could actually pay for my kids' college tuition without having to take loans. That's probably not going to happen. He was way too left. I mean, the whole presidential orders that he would do after he lost the Senate, everything about the Obama, his foreign policy, Benghazi was terrible. Like there was no part of But when I wanted to talk to my family, which are all Democrats, they still think he's the best president that ever walked into the White House. And I just,
but Dan, fundamentally, you know, you and I have had this debate. I'm bringing it back up again. America is turning into a country of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. It's like these elite. We grew up in an elite part of America. We have a great, you know, the public school system in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. It's excellent considering where they are. There's a spectrum of those schools. They're not all excellent. And education is a multi-billion-dollar business in the United States. And you're creating a system, and there is a system of automatically having a second-class, third-class citizenship, regardless of your ethnicity, but more or less about your economic availability and your opportunity for economic advancement. And the American average industrial wage hasn't increased since, like, I don't know, the 1980s. I think it's still like 33,000. And you talk about these people in the Midwest and the Rust Belt and sort of people that voted for Trump, voting totally against their interests, for a rich guy who pays no tax, who basically, you know, he's a snake oil salesman. And I appreciate you didn't vote for him. You're not going to vote for him, but he doesn't represent the Republican platform I respected. The Republican platform I respected was the Ronald Reagan sort of conservative. I appreciate low tax. I appreciate the understanding of corporate, you know, and banking governance and making sure people have a fair, balanced tax system. But it's not a fair and balanced tax system when the wealthiest of the country pay the lowest amount of tax just because they can afford an accounting firm.
I'm not going to disagree with you completely, Sean, but that's what happened to the Democrats too. And the whole idea of, you know, in the Tom Frank piece, you know, if you were to watch that or listen to that podcast, you know, it's the same deal. You know, that they lost their identity and they go out like they're, you know, working for the working class people, and they're not. I mean, Hillary was not a working class person. She was just as involved with the big banks and taking donations or whatever and building the global Clinton initiative, you know, and they come across, especially as you know, in Massachusetts, the Boston politicians come across as complete elitists. You know, Harvard professor, you know, from Harvard, you know, Elizabeth Warren, you know, makes fun of Trump for flipping windows and properties, which she's been doing her entire life. Like the whole, you know, lies about the fact that she thinks she has Indian descent. Like it's just, you know, so again, I'm not going to defend Trump by any means, but I'm not going to accept that the Democratic stance that they actually, you know, are for the working people, because I don't believe that for a second.
But I think their legislation is definitely favoring the middle class and working class. And that's just within the local state system. That's just a fact. But I think in your union representation, I appreciate the unions fund into huge Democratic parties. But the thing is that you're right. I think the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, they are major corporations now. They're huge money-making corporations. If you really take a look back at how many hundreds of millions of dollars are going into campaigns, and this extremism has just brought it to light. Like Biden is raising hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions, amazingly so, because he needs to do it to go against the Trump machine. Maybe the unfortunate thing is there's not an opportunity for a third party to come in, and you're seeing the extreme parts. You're seeing the Tea Party, which has evolved into Trump Party, you know, the Trump Party. You're seeing, fair enough, you're seeing the Democratic Party now going so far left in some corners that it's looking, you know, it's socialism, you know, and I think that that's dangerous as well. But a vast majority of Americans are in the middle, you know, they're your Ronald Reagan Republican, your Kennedy sort of, you know, okay, Kennedy was a good liberal, but Kennedy sort of Democrat, but he was also fiscally conservative. Can you have healthcare in the United States that's offering people a decent quality of life in the wealthiest country in the world? Apparently not. Can you have education that's free or at least low to medium cost for the majority of the population in the richest country in the world? Apparently not. And you're right, both parties aren't solving those problems. And you have a good job, you take care of your family, and it's a serious investment for you and your wife to put your kids through college. And you have serious work in front of you to make sure that's a commitment that you can fulfill financially. And that's a strain on anyone, let alone somebody who has your professional background, your credentials, and your capability. Everyone else is out of the picture. I paid.
That's true. And again, and if I've never been consulted for the Democratic Party, I never will. But if I were, the first thing I would tell Joe Biden is please don't bring up the fact that the first thing you're going to do is raise taxes. And because down here in where I am in North Carolina, it's, you know, with my job, that's every commercial down here is just the quote of him saying, I'm going to immediately raise taxes. Like, why would you do that? And then the other night, I thought he won a debate, if there was such a thing. I don't know how you win a bickering contest, but if you were to win a bickering contest, he won it until he then mentions the oil and the fossil fuel. Like so Trump's in Pennsylvania telling the coal miners he's getting coal back, and everybody else is saying, well, we're going to now put regulations on fossil fuels and essentially make the rest of you guys unemployed. Like it's just not a good. It's just not a good strategy.
That's what happened in the last election. Was Trump, as you said, exactly? He's talked about Pennsylvania and coal and things like that. Is that going to work again for him this time? Like in those swing states, that was it was an economic argument. Is it possible the economic argument will win out again? Could Trump possibly win?
I don't think so. I think people are so COVID is so enveloped in the American conversation now. And I think that the economic impact that has had, if you can show people now that you can get people out of the COVID-19 scenario, which will help the economy, which I think Biden's people, that's their message. Trust me because I know what I'm doing. Trust my people because we know what we're doing. I think that's gonna help the Democrats. I don't think Republicans. I think that ship has sailed for Donald Trump.
So, Dan, you mentioned there a minute ago Frank Thomas's book, What's the Matter with Kansas? It was on a podcast that we heard from David McWilliams. And I think that sums up the developments in America over the last 20 years and also talking about the two Americas. So there's very much the west coast of America and then there's the middle America. And in Ireland, we go on holidays and we go on our J1s to the coast, but we don't really know the middle of America. And that's the red America as well. So that's an area that I'd be interested to talk about now. I mean, you work, where is it? North Carolina, is that right? Or
that's correct, North Carolina. Yeah, very, very red state. In the area that I'm in, which is the Greenville area of North Carolina, very, very pro-Trump. In fact, 2 weeks ago, they actually had a rally here at the airport. He's had two other rallies in North Carolina since Pence has had another one scheduled next week. So this is a state that they really want to make sure that they lock down. So, and it is interesting because, in a few conversations that I've had, and I don't try to bring up politics with people that I don't really know, but naturally, what else are you going to talk about in a pandemic? So it typically will come up, when you're at a pub or just, having a bite to eat. And it just, their impression of Trump is that he's not Biden and he's not Obama. That's basically it. And they really believe that Trump supports them, even though, again, he's a very rich man from New York. People from North Carolina, the South, don't really like people from New York and even New England, the carpetbaggers, if you will. So decades ago, it was always that there was a division between the South and the North, and someone like a Trump would never even make it to be a candidate just because of that, representing this party. But they're just, they considered Joe Biden to be a socialist. The remarks he's made about he wants to follow in President Obama's footsteps, which is viewed as very left. That he's already talked about raising taxes. The best choice for them still is Donald Trump.
But do people know what the definition of socialism is?
Good question.
Well, seriously. I mean, the control of production and development and sale, like the state is not going there. The United States is not doing that. That's the failing of the educational system. The fact that somebody can throw out that the Democratic Party is going socialist is insane.
Well, I think their view, Sean, is universal health care. I think it's the fact that they want to go fossil fuel. I mean, these folks are not, as eco-friendly as you would have in the Northeast. It's one of those. It's a very industrial area. A lot of manufacturing, a lot of warehousing. So their view is that universal health care, higher taxes. That's socialism.
So when I was watching the debates, Trump kept throwing out that line, socialist, communist, and the right-wing media, say like Fox News, are throwing out that line. So that was something I was wondering, is it the media that is getting that message across? What sort of media do you watch? Like, you're not a Fox News watcher, I would guess.
No, well, I to be honest with you, I do. And the only reason I do that is because it amuses me. I mean, because if you watch Fox News and then you watch MSNBC, you're wondering what they're reporting on. They can't be reporting on the same debate that I watched. But yeah, at the end of the day, I haven't heard a true definition of why they say that. And certainly, Trump will throw out anything he can to, they think will stick. But, I think in people's minds, socialism really is that the government gets very involved, and it's universal health care, and it's raising taxes to pay for that. And
socialism. And and I appreciate that's what they're throwing out there. But the problem is it underlines that the public educational system in America is absolute garbage. If people think universal health care is socialism, they need to take a history class. And I think that's the problem, is that like Canada has universal health care. They're not socialists.
Well, but Sean, see, you're exactly the Democrat that they hate.
I know.
You're Elizabeth Warren. That comment of that they don't know what socialism is. And the comment is that the education's, crap. Like you said, we grew up in the Boston area, which is a very, very prosperous area, if you will, and invest a lot in education and what have you. You're the exact reason why they're going to stay as a Republican and vote for Trump.
But that's the you're okay. That's a valid point. But I think that there's a highlight here of the failing of the entire American system that says, if you can't, the biggest failing of any democratic or state, I don't mean democratic party, I mean a democracy, you have to have an educated population. And America, this highlights that, people who do not know the definition of simple things, or people that can be persuaded against their own interest to vote for somebody who has, to your point, whether it be an elitist from the Northeast or a Republican who just wants to play to his own interests. The fact that people don't have that basic understanding at a level where, he got 40 something percent of the last election, 48% of the people who voted. And that's disturbing. That means the educational system's failing the United States and the democracy.
But again, Sean, when you look at it, the what they call the working class, it used to be termed the non-educated, and by the non-educated, I mean just not college educated, which is the true, the blue collar. There's several terms that have been used. They're the ones that are the biggest base for Trump, and they're interestingly, a statistic came out, and I don't remember how many of the swing states, but a majority of the swing states, 2/3 of what's considered the white male, non-educated or working class has 2/3 more population than the Hispanics and Blacks, African-American community combined. Okay. So again, you look at where the polls are today in the statistics, Biden's either at Hillary's level from 2016, in some cases even below a little bit, especially in those swing states, really not losing at all. Now, there were other circumstances around that, including the whole email scandal and what have you. But at the end of the day, if you think that the Democrats are in a driving seat right now, stand corrected. It's not the case at all, and I don't have any inkling whatsoever to think that Biden's going to pull this off. And as a Republican, I don't want him to, but as somebody that just can't support the person in the White House, if it happens, I'll live with it.
So is it similar then to 2016 from the point of view that the Democrats have an overall majority, but when it comes to swing states, it's still very tight?
It'll come down to the swing states for certain, in my estimation, absolutely.
Yeah. So, it'll be Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Florida will be one of the first states to offer its numbers. So that'll be an indicator. If Florida goes to Biden, that's a huge indicator for the Democrats. But like the one thing, and Virgil, you did ask about where we were going in parts of America, that right now, from what I see in the media and yes, I look at all branches of the press, but right now, if you look at 2016, 55%, this is for context, okay? 55% of the American population who could vote, voted. 55% of the 100% who can vote. And out of that 55%, 48% voted for Clinton, and 45.9%, or basically 46% voted for Trump. But Trump got the swing states. So that's why they're so important. And he wins the Electoral College. He wins the United States presidency. But that's still just 55% of the people who could vote, voted. And what I'm seeing right now across the broad spectrum of the media that I'm looking at, you're getting people waiting in line for hours, literally hours in different states and swing states. And I think that maybe 10% margin, 50% margin. So you might get a 65% turnout this time around. And I think that'll swing it for Biden, to Dan's point about the numbers. And I think for context, if you get a 65% turnout of American voters who can vote, I think Biden wins just on the numbers.
So 50 million have already voted as well, which is a huge increase on the last election.
It will, again, assuming that there's been several lawsuits from the Trump administration in certain states, and in some cases, in fact, the verdict just came out yesterday, and I don't recall the state that said that it can't go, the polling can't go past election day, when they originally were going to have a little bit of a lag period. Some states are allowing a little bit of a lag period. So, and he's going to contest all of those because, there was issues with our postal system, saying that they're not sure they're going to be able to get them in time. Like there's all different types of issues. And he's actually said that the mail-in votes, he's not even going to consider to be valid. So if you don't come out on election day, then they're not going to count. And therefore he won't see the White House, which is, again, as crazy as it gets, but it's the reality. And on top of that, they've a lot of the FBI has turned up all these different militias throughout the country that they're breaking down or disrupting one by one that are actually looking to physically go with firearms to the polls on that day, because they know that that's what Trump's going to consider to be the actual election, and that any kind of mail-in vote could be fraudulent, could be filled out by, an old person, a senior's grandchild or whatever it is, that he just won't consider them to be valid. So, and that's all a ploy, just because he knows full well that the people that are going to do the balloting are typically going to be the seniors that don't feel comfortable because of COVID, going to the polls, and it's people that, that are going to vote against him. So
could the country go into chaos? Is that a possibility?
There was actually articles written the last couple of days about that they fear that there's going to be people overbuying again in grocery stores, and then we're going to once again have difficulty trying to find products. The people believe that there's going to be a huge civil unrest from election day, at least for a couple of weeks. So people are starting to hoard groceries and starting to be ready to bunker down.
Sorry, but are you nervous about that, Dan? Like, do you think
I'm nervous. I don't. I'm gonna truly believe in our capitalist and the government. At the end of the day, we have the right military leaders in place. Is that there's that it's just the system actually works. All of the normal Trump supporters on Capitol Hill, including the top guys in the Senate, have all said that that's not going to be the case. That it will absolutely be a friendly handover, which peaceful transfer of power. It's the way it's been for since the first election, whatever, hundreds of years ago. So I'm gonna believe in that. You won't see me hoarding anything. But is there a part of my mind that says that this guy is just uncontrollable? Absolutely. I mean, how can't you?
Are there a lot more Republicans this time that are going to vote Democrat, or is there a percentage because of Trump?
They in a poll, they actually said that he's lost about 23% of the Republicans that I forget the exact quote, but Massachusetts Republicans are considered to be Democrats by Southern conservatives.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So they tend to be a little bit more of a middle of the road, like we're reasonable people. Let's put it that way. And so those reasonable people like myself, that he's lost, which he had last time. And it's interesting as well that he's polling hugely down the last time. And again, I forget the percentage, but it was in the 70% that he had with post high school, so college educator or above females. So that's why you saw the plea in a couple of his campaign rallies where he's talking to suburban women to say, you guys should love me. You need to love me. You need to come back to it, because he's losing that one. I mean, that one was massive. I mean, people were shocked by that number after the last election, especially considering that you would think that they play the card that because it's a female running for president, that just because she's a female and everyone wants to see a female, that they're going to vote for her. That's not the case. A lot of these women are obviously educated. They looked at the platform, they looked at what they had and made the choice that they made.
Yeah. So his line when he says, you should love me, to the suburban moms, is to do with safety and security. And I haven't seen much of that talk of that over the last month. Like, have all those protests and things died down in America? Or are they just not being, like say Portland, is Portland stopped, or is it just not being reported now?
That's kind of old news. Because it's leading up or 10 days from the election, so they don't tend to have these things. But no, they're still happening. They're happening even in Boston. There was just another incident the other day in Chicago, which again got a little bit of news, but not as much as you would have thought, because it was protests that followed up, but they didn't really, it was mentioned in the news, but not as much. But I think they're 10 days out of the election. I think that they're really trying to stay. The media's trying not to really push one agenda to the other, unless you're watching Fox or you're watching MSNBC. But for everybody else locally, and that was interesting as well. I thought that Tom, Frank made it, it was spot on when he talked about the local news and even the press. The press doesn't exist anymore. So people go to Twitter to get their in Facebook, because they don't have, the papers we used to have, the Herald and the Telegraph and the Globe, and it just doesn't exist anymore. If it does, it's been streamlined, either under Murdoch or another, where it's so slanted, you almost can't believe the news. So people go out and find their other sources to get that information, and sometimes direct. I mean, some people live off of Trump's tweets as reality.
But that reinforces a mental state that's very unhealthy, where you don't get to challenge your own mindset, and it's really dangerous. And I think that even in the liberal sort of slant of the Democratic Party, where I would be, and my news sources would be in that vein. You know what I mean? So I have to go and look at Fox. I have to go look at other things. So I have at least an idea of what else is being thought about and what else is being talked about. But I do think that at the end of the day, Fergal brought up the issue about what'll happen if even the inference of not having a peaceful transition of power in the United States is a rally call to nutbags. You know what I mean? You know, Second Amendment right people going out there in different states who are going to make, you know, they got nothing else to do, and they're going to just make hay while the sun shines. And I think that's a real threat to, again, I appreciate that. My one concern is I remember, you remember the flag burnings, Dan, you know, the United States, the Iran or Iraq or whatever, they do the flag burnings of the United States or effigies to Uncle Sam, and they burn them. And it looked like the whole country of Iran was against the United States. And then they pan back, the cameraman pans back, and it's like 25 guys, you know, and everyone else is like shopping, and they're kind of going around in their mopeds and kind of like going about their business, you know, and it's like, that's my concern about the way the American press is depicting some of this stuff, the riots in Seattle, and it's not a majority of people. You know what I mean? It's a cohort. The same with the Republican right-wing nutbags. It's not a majority of the Republican Party. It's an offshoot. It's a right-wing.
I agree with you, Sean, but it's also a strong. Unfortunately, I mean, if you look at the Cook brothers, you look at some of the other, you know, because you know, literally 10 to 15 people, as Tom Frank, you know, was mentioned, own 90% of the money in the U.S. Unfortunately, they have all the power.
Yeah.
So it's just, so I agree with you. It's really hard because they really push their agenda. I mean, it's hard to believe that Trump's, you know, has 3 wives, and on his 3rd wife, he cheated with a porn star, and that he's still going to get the evangelical vote. Yeah. How is that possible?
I know.
How is that possible?
You know, they've turned a lot of cheeks, apparently. So I think that's the challenge, and I agree with you. Ethically and morally, it's like, come on, you can't. So who knows? And I think that's the challenge. And Middle America is a great place. I mean, I was in St. Louis a couple of years ago now, and I remember I had to do a thing for Federal Highway out there, and I'd never been to St. Louis, Missouri. You know, Missouri. And I went, and I had this like sort of image in my head of, you know, Tom's, because the Mississippi goes right through there. So I'm thinking Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, the stuff I read as a kid. And I'm going, okay, I'm going to go for a swim, you know? So I went down, I don't know if I ever told you this, but the hotel I was in, I had the first day kind of to myself. So I went down, I had my togs on, as we say here in Ireland, but had a towel, I had, you know, my sneakers, everything with t-shirt. I was going through the lobby, and the lady in reception's like, where are you going? And I said, oh, I'm going for a swim. And she goes, where? I said, in the Mississippi, like, you know, Tom Sawyer. And she goes, are you out of your mind? It's an industrial river. You're going to get sucked into it, you know? And I said, no, let's just take a look. There might be a little bit of option that I could go in. And so I went down. It's huge. You know what I mean? And it's like in giant industrial cargo ships, I would have been killed. So I'm like, where did Tom Sawyer go? You know, where did he go for a swim? So it was a real eye opener that, you know, I had this image being from Boston and growing up in Boston. It's the middle of America is serious business, you know.
You two were going to call their album, The Joshua Tree, they were going to call it The Two Americas, actually. So it is quite different, isn't it? Between the middle of America and the coast.
Yeah, well, and again, if you divide the two, you couldn't get polar opposites of California and you know, or the West Coast and the East Coast. So the Midwest kind of bridges that a little bit, and certainly the South bridges it a little bit. But yeah, if you look at somebody and what the politics and what happens in California, and look at what happens on the East Coast, I mean, it's just a whole different mindset as to how you approach everything. So it's and it's interesting though that as Tom Frank said about Kansas, is that used to be kind of where it was almost a neutral site that a Republican could win one year, a Democrat another year, depending on what their agenda was and whether they were likable. Never going to happen in California. It almost has never happened in Massachusetts. I mean, so there's certain states that these candidates won't even bother with, because either, like New Hampshire, it's a small electoral, so why bother, you know, getting 2 or 3 electorals. In California, again, it's not an all-in state. So it's divided electorals, and it's going to be Democrat anyway. So that's why these swing states, and most of them are Midwest, you know, that's why those swing states are so important to them.
And actually,
it is all in.
I noticed Beto O'Rourke keeps asking Biden to come to Texas because he's going, it's winnable, and he just doesn't go there. So I can't figure out why they do that. Why Hillary was.
Well, I can tell you right now, after his comment the other night about oil, it's not going to. He's not winning that. I mean, he might as well, save himself his plane ticket to that state for certain.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing I can't get my head around is in Ireland, Trump is a figure of fun. My favorite story, I think, of the 4 years is when he was in hospital for COVID. When he was coming out, he planned to walk out pretending he was frail and then rip open his shirt and reveal a Superman t-shirt. This was his plan.
You can't make it up, right? I know that's 100% true. And then the idea that he went out with a presidential limousine, just so he could wave to people, and yet still the other night was adamant about not wearing a mask. If you think of this, right? If you could if you were a Democrat and you said, okay, I got to run against a Republican, let's see if we can't get that person involved in, say making Israel the headquarters of the Jewish community. Let's get involved in Ukraine and try to bribe, there against my opponent. Let's make friends with an awful dictator in North Korea. Let's make friends with Russia, who's been, again, a Cold War, right, for years. Let's get a pandemic. Let's kill 220,000 people, right? Let's have the market be volatile every time he opens his mouth. Let's have a guy that tweets. Like, who does that? Is he 18? Really? Let's have a guy that cheats on his wife, with a prostitute and then pays her off. And they have the check to prove it, right? He's got a revolving door of staff members, like key staff members, chief of staff and foreign, like the whole night. Like you couldn't check more boxes if you were a Democratic candidate to say this is assuring. I mean, this is going to be unanimous. Like 75% of people are going to go to the polls and 65% of them are going to vote for. And yet right now, I have little or no confidence that Biden's going to pull it off. Sean says more confidence than I do, but I have little or no confidence.
But the part I can't figure out is how come you aren't doing, like the Lincoln Project, right? They're Republicans against Trump. Why aren't you saying, I'm going to vote for Biden, with your fingers crossed behind your back, just so that Trump doesn't get in? I mean, I'll give you an example. Borat in the New York Times today said that he would worry 4 more years of Trump, that America would end up being like Turkey or Russia, democracy only in name. Is that not more important than taxes?
Well, at the end of the day, at some point, you got to establish a moral compass, right, Fergal? And that's what I've done. So I'm not going to change my belief in what I think politically should happen, and I'm not going to do it just because this guy's so bad. It's just not what's going to happen. But I feel like my abstaining from a vote sends a message, but I'm not going to go to the point where I'm actually, because again, if he were to take up where President Obama left off, that hurts me. That hurts me, economically. I'm not in belief of a lot of what he's going to try to put through the House and Senate, and again, God forbid he wins both of those. You'll have another first term of Barack, at least the first 2 years, which so much got passed. It's just against what I believe. So at the end of the day, I believe abstaining, is the message. I may be wrong about that, but certainly there's a certain perspective out there that says let's absolutely get him out of there, just because it could be that much more devastating the next 4 years. And I kind of hope that happens, but like I said, its platform ultimately is what I would normally vote for. So you take him out and superimpose the governor of Massachusetts, this guy named Charlie Baker, who's unbelievable. I mean, this guy, again,
and he's a Republican.
Southwood, he's a Republican. Yeah. But he's a moderate Republican, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he's the type of person that you would want to have in the White House. He's on this platform right now, 100%. And I'm sending out texts and emails and contact and I'm networking to anybody that I can that might even be on the fence and jumping and screaming that they're making a bad decision if they don't vote for him.
But Sean, then I would ask you, as a Democrat, do you think that it's just perception that the party is becoming more socialist? Is that just perception, or do you think they've moved away from the center? Or is Biden the guy to move it back to the center? Because that's what I think he will do.
I think that the Democratic Party is becoming a much bigger boat. The Ark used to have a certain amount, 2 of everything. And now there is a lot more in there. And I think that's very good for the Democratic Party. And it's very challenging for the Democratic Party because you do have the sort of the more left wing leaning. And I think that's a wonderful term to use. But what it means is left wing universal health care? Is that really left wing? Is left wing having reasonable price education for third level, universities? Is that really left wing? If that's left wing, America's screwed, because you can't have in a global and to Dan's point, in a global economic forum where people are, where technology and intellectual property is key, that's the coal. The coal of the next generation is intellectual property. The oil of the next generation is intellectual property. And if the United States doesn't realize that and invest in education, forget it. It's basically going down the tubes. And it's going to be like the fall of the Roman Empire. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen incrementally. And incrementally, America has gone down because it hasn't invested in education. And that's where America's losing. And that's where you create a two-tier and a perception that we're all elitist in the Northeast. They're all sort of, kind of hardworking, blue collar in the Midwest, and they, they oh shucks and all that. That's not the case. There's very intelligent people all over the United States, and they deserve opportunities, but those opportunities don't exist. They don't exist. And in certain parts of the United States, because it's becoming a 2 to 3 tier society. It's not good.
We've mentioned him a few times, Thomas Frank's book, but in it he had a great line where he said Democrats have become the party of the winners, i.e. the technology companies, the college educated kids. The Republicans have become the party of the losers, the people left behind, but the Republican Party have convinced them to vote for them because they're left behind. But then once they get in, they're looking after the billionaires.
Well, it's 100% accurate. It's 100% accurate. Yeah. But again, if at the end of the day, from a view of what we consider to be the working class, what they look at socialism, and let's just say that they just compare it to Ireland, the UK, it doesn't matter what it is. But, for them, the idea that there was going to be, college tuition paid for, like who was actually going to get that, and what was really the plan of that, universal health care, like that. So the main items that you would normally differentiate a capitalist society and a socialist society, that's what the Democrats are really pushing. Bernie Sanders in particular, and although he's an engaging guy, oh my God, he's so far left, he's fallen off the cliff. And yet when he polls, really, and yet he polls incredibly. He polls incredibly.
I know, but the thing is, Dan, when I was in college and you were in college and we were friggin' borrowing money and I was working 5 jobs, if somebody said to me school should be free, I'd be like, he's my guy. I'm 100% behind him. Now, the other thing is that, but the other thing is universities, forget about universities. Like, why I would, learning a trade, but that's where the education needs to be for everybody to have an opportunity to do whatever they want.
But who pays for that, Sean? Who's going to pay for that, me? So now I have to take loans to put my kids through college because full well they're not going to go for free. This is going to be a community college type level thing that I'm going to then fund. I'll be the one that's funding the other ones and having to take loans for my own kids. I mean, it's crazy.
But again, university education in the United States is such a huge business, and it's a branded business, Dan. You know that, and I know that. But if you go to certain universities in the United States and you have that name on your resume when you're 21, 22 years of age, people will put you on the top of the pile. If you don't have that name, you're in the bottom of the pile. Actually, you're in the rubbish bin. And And the other thing is that, universities, I think universities are becoming irrelevant. I mean, people need to learn other skills and spending, what is it now? 40, like for the average university in the Northeast is like 40 grand a year. A year.
Yeah. If you take out the community colleges, actually above that. Yeah. Per year. Yeah.
You're looking 40, and that's being moderate, like that's middle of the road sort of price. So you're looking at, you're going to spend for one child to go to university, you might as well give them the money, have them invest in property, go get an accounting degree, get some certification.
No, trades. The trades. Become a plumber, electrician. They're good paying, and they, absolutely.
I don't want a lawyer wiring my house. It'll burn to the ground. You know what I mean? So there's got to be a bit of give and take here. And I think that's where the Republican Party could take advantage of a platform like that. And the Democratic Party have lost that. When I talk to Democrats and people in Democratic Party, I'm like, what happened to our value system of, good trades, honest, really good like people, a good pal of mine I went to high school with, like he's got his qualifications, electrician. He's got a house down the Cape. He's got a ski lodge up in New Hampshire. He's got, 7 people working with him. He's minted. His kids are he's doing fine because he went with where his heart was. He wanted to work with his hands and work with, electricity, whatever. But he's minted.
And he wasn't riddled with college debt.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think that's where Bernie Sanders' message is very attractive. You know what I mean? And
but it is. But again, to the left, mostly to the youth, the very left side of it. And again, that you'll just never get the swing states or the middle of America to ever in a million years go for that. Not for a second.
And I think automation is what's killed middle of America more than anything else.
Yeah, and putting jobs across seas. But again, as a Republican, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. You have to be competitive with everything, including wages, and a lot of the unions, depending on what they do,
But let me challenge that. So
Trump tapped into that last time, where he talked about those jobs, and actually coal manufacturing has declined at record levels during his term. This idea of bringing back manufacturing jobs, that's what I meant by Democrats, or the more high technology jobs. Surely Americans are seeing that now, like the 4 years.
Oh, no, they're not.
Are they not?
No. And you would think, because the statistics say, notice how he hasn't brought up the wall?
Yeah. Exactly.
So what he went on 4 years ago was like anything else, a ploy to get in to become the
like his
president.
His guy, Michael Cohen, his bagman, he said, like, imagine Trump is a donkey and the carrot is $1, and he'll do anything for $1.
Yeah. Well, and that brings a whole other thing, which could be an entire podcast on its own. Is you look at the ethical part of this, which is he constantly wanted to bring up Hunter Biden the other night, and I'm surprised that Joe Biden didn't bring up the fact that he brought his daughter and son-in-law on, gave them clearance that generals generally that high-ranking military people don't get. He's in Mar-a-Lago every other weekend, paid for by the government. He stays in any Trump property if it's anywhere close to where he's the idea that that's not, but again, you would think that would be for an educated mind, or even somebody that just reads the actual facts. You would say to yourself, how is he accusing Hunter Biden of benefiting from this? And then you look at the corporate tax break. You don't think that the Trump enterprises benefited from a 13% corporate tax reduction?
But even in Ireland, we can see, like, he's got Doonbeg, and Michael Pence came over, and he was going to London or something, but he stayed in Doonbeg with all his entourage. The bill probably would have been $1 million. That's just kickback. Like, something that I've been waiting for somebody to say and no one has said. Something I predict, that if Trump loses, he'll actually golf every day from the 3rd of November until 3rd of January, whatever. I guarantee you, he'll golf twice a day. He'll literally fly from one golf course to the other, because it's probably $1 million each time, and no one ever brings it up.
Yeah,
right.
I do think Trump's going to look for a deal, because he may be someone that could be in a lot of trouble. He could be in a lot of trouble legally, and he may look for a peaceful transition of power if you just leave me alone. And there's going to be something going on, because there's too many things, too many real issues with the executive, which is called the presidency of the United States is the executive branch, that he has way too many violations that he can just walk away from. And I do think America needs to move beyond Trump. And I don't think you should persecute him or prosecute him, because it'll just put salt in the wound if he loses. Yeah, it'll ignite. And I think that is something people need to be very wary of, is that as much as we just personally, as much as I do not like Donald Trump, I don't know if it's smart to skewer him and cook him over the coals, because it may ignite something that you just can't turn back,
Agreed. And actually, a topic that we haven't brought up, which is probably the biggest one in the election, is COVID. So yesterday, I think there was over 82,000 cases. The highest figure was yesterday. Surely that's going to be massive over the next week or so. I don't understand why that isn't the deal breaker.
Well, it's interesting that again, the Trump supporters, you can't change their minds, but they said politically made a bad decision to actually start animosity towards Fauci. So a couple of weeks ago, he was in his normal tweeting and other stuff, just talking about how that that him and his bunch of idiots, I think he actually used that term, idiots, that people are tired of listening to him, and he obviously said in the debate that they're we're turning the corner. So again, anybody that's sensible and look at the facts would know that we're not turning the corner by any means. And now with the flu season coming upon us and we still don't have a vaccine, it's just going to get worse. Ireland obviously is in that situation now. Yeah. So I'm surprised that it's not more of an issue for people. But at the end of the day, because he promises that he's the one that's going to be able to find the vaccine way before the Democrats, because they're so disorganized and whatever, and he's already been involved in it. He's convinced people that the source to a vaccine is through him and not through Biden.
But I also think the presidency is such a propaganda machine. To have the presidency, you have the pulpit of the American attention. You have it. You're sitting there at the top of the queue. Everyone's listening to you. And when you say, I'm over it, it's no big deal, oh, I beat it, it's fine. He took a helicopter 3 city blocks, to a hospital that gave him the best doctors the planet can offer.
I started the talk talking about the reason why I wanted to do it was just the perception. When I've been talking to people about their perception of America, and during the week Obama did a speech and he said in it that there are consequences to his actions. It affects how the world looks at America. Does that matter, do you think, how the world looks at America to Americans?
Well, I can't speak for Americans, Fergal, but it does to me, and Finn O'Toole's, when he talks about us being, now piteous, I think he's 100% correct. And he wrote, I forget when he wrote that, but it was a while ago, it was months ago, but he even wrote that. I can only imagine what he would say today. And it is. And I'm one of the, not one, but among an elite group of folks that actually have interactions with foreign countries like Ireland that do have aren't a 2-party system, they're a multi-party system. And so I appreciate it more than others. The fact that, I told Sean, I can't believe 130 million Americans, and we have these two.
330 million.
I'm sorry, 330 million and 328 million, I think exactly. And yet there's under 5 million on the island. And you guys have brilliant politicians. I mean, when I'm there and I listen to politics and I listen to debates, your Taoiseach is, I think, fantastic. Like, is a great politician. It amazes me. I don't know why that is, and I assume it's the multi-party system.
It's our educational system, Dan. It's the educational system in Ireland. I honestly can tell you that the basic level of education in Ireland is light years above the basic level in the United States, and that's the difference.
Yeah. So. Actually, just one other question I want to ask you was just from the Senate. So just say if Biden does get elected, what are the odds of the Democrats also getting the Senate?
So I don't have the stats on me, but similar to the last election where they were able to maintain the Senate and actually gain a couple seats, that was because the number of Democrats, they're talking about the Republicans, the number of Democrats seats that were open were a majority. Yeah. It's just the opposite this time, where there's a huge number of Republican seats. But it is interesting this morning, again, on MSNBC, that I was watching the senator from Michigan was saying his polls were for like up until this last couple of weeks, he was 13, 14 points above his GOP rival.
I saw
and he's worried about what with the election because they've sunk millions of dollars. And Michigan, again, is one of those swing states,
Yeah, it is.
Midwestern states.
I think the Democrats are going to win the Senate. I do think they're going to win the Senate because I think when people are waiting in line for 8 hours to vote, they're probably going to be voting Democrat, majority of the population that are doing that. And they're just going to vote down the ticket Democrat, regardless of who the candidate is. So I do think they're going to vote down the ticket Democrat, and I think the United States Senate will be majority Democrat after this election.
So last question then, call it. Who do you think it's going to be?
John thinks Biden will pull it off if the vote-in is recognized and that actually happens. And if that is the case, then I can't disagree with him. But the fact that in most swing states, Biden is I want to say the average of the swing states last time, Hillary was about 16% in favor. The same time, in 2016, and he's only 11%, means that it could go either way. I mean, I really, if I had to go to Vegas, I'd probably put my money on Trump because he'll figure out some way to do something that's just going to shock America and get his base to the polls. But
I'll leave it on a positive note. Dan agrees with me that Biden will win.
I think he's got the best. He's got the best choice. And again, polling. But I would have said the same thing, even though I didn't vote for her. I would have said the same about Hillary in 2016. Okay. Look at what that.
Okay, so Sean, you're saying Biden, and Dan, you're saying Trump, and I'm saying Biden. And if it's Trump, what we're going to have to do is get you back on, and Sean, you can be, or Dan, you can be a war correspondent then, reporting.
Jesus, yeah, reporting from the riot in North Carolina. Yeah, that'll be interesting.
But the thing is, I think the Democrats actually brace for it to happen. I think it's the other way around. I think if Biden, like, that will be the war. I'll be the war correspondent. Biden actually wins.
Really?
Because Trump will absolutely go into a bunker. He's absolutely.
Oh, you mean
just his ego? Yeah. He's got to find a way to be able to get out that makes him look good, and there's no way to do that. You know, he's going to blame it on corrupt, you know,
voting,
the corrupt voting and the other stuff. It's just, and he's laid a base for people to believe that he's right.
Yeah.
That he's correct. And like I said, people are expecting to show up at the polls with militia type arsenal.
And that's the propaganda power of the presidency. That's the power the presidency has. That sort of influence and conjecture that can be believed is so it's just so dangerous. And Trump is playing it to the best he can, because he absolutely is he's a salesman. He's a total snake oil salesman. And if he doesn't get his way, he'll burn the village.
That's a really good note to end on, I think.
Yep.
America is going up in flames. Well, either way. So you've answered my question then. I'm not booking my tickets for a while yet.
I wouldn't book your ticket anytime soon. Yeah, I would give it about, not that you could anyway, but I would give yourself about
Travel Tales with Fergal. Give it a while. Give it a year. Yeah.
Give it at least 6 to 8 months. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Let everything else settle. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks a million, guys. I really appreciate that. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
I hope you found that discussion as informative as I did. I think it shows that the economy and taxes are still important to Republicans, and the question now is, will that argument win out, or has Trump done enough damage for those Reagan Republicans to vote for Biden? They say it is one of the most important elections in US history, and our guests have highlighted it's still all to play for. Back to our regular Tuesday episode next week, and every Tuesday after that. Be found on Instagram, Travel Tales with Fergal, for details on guests. Stay safe.
Travel Tales with Fergal.